It's a Politics Wednesday edition of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. We have the good fortune today to have two excellent analysts in different spheres of political science. Wayne Moyer is with us, Senior Faculty of Political Science at Grinnell College. Hi, Wayne.
Hello, Ben.
We'll have Wayne chime in on some domestic politics, but of course we know his wheelhouse is foreign relations and a lot of other things here too. So we want to talk about the pause on the war that ended and the implications there. Of course, huge implications for us in the Midwest, especially as an ag community. Megan Goldberg with us as well, Associate Professor of American Politics at Cornell College. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Ben.
And, of course, we welcome our listeners, 1-866-780-9100. River to River at iowapublicradio.org. Let's take a quick survey of what we'll dash through that ad that came out today with the Obama endorsement of Josh Turek. We'll listen to some of that ad. Quite entertaining. Overnight, that pause in the war that ended. We'll talk a little bit about E15, how that still hasn't made it through. Iowa Democrats not ruling out defying their own national party over the caucuses, and that fight within the Senate over whether to go home next month in August at all. Let's start with this, though. A Polk County judge has ruled that Libertarian candidate for governor Nicholas Gluba and his running mate Jules Cutler cannot be restored to Iowa's November 3rd ballot. It ends, at least at the district court level, a fight that started with a 30-second interaction at a counter at the Lucas State Office Building in Des Moines. The judge issued the ruling yesterday upholding the state objection that the panel's June 15th decision that removed the ticket. This after finding Cutler missed the 5 p.m. June 2nd deadline to file her affidavit of candidacy for lieutenant governor. Cutler says she tried to hand the form over, and an elections support specialist in the Secretary of State's office told her it wasn't needed and wouldn't take it. Phillips, that's the Secretary at the Secretary of State's office, said Cutler never offered it. So this panel found Phillips more credible, concluded the deadline had passed, and that the defect could not be cured. So this was a campaign that had collected more than 8,000 signatures, more than twice the 3,500 required. And here's an important footnote that came out here. Gluba, the judge wrote in the ruling that Gluba could potentially stay on the ballot by replacing Cutler with a new running mate, but said, hey, that's a separate legal process and nothing to do with ruling on this objection. With all that laid down before you, so we have this statewide ticket, Megan, gathering more than 8,000 signatures. It came down to one person's word against another's about a brief exchange at a counter. Is the system working as designed, or is there a problem here, you see?
I mean, so I think that on its own, this particular case is maybe not, it doesn't sort of raise my eyebrows that much. There are rules, and, we've seen it's sort of par for the course that, folks' nomination petitions will get challenged. We have seen that, I think, become increasingly partisan, and that's sort of like an avenue for campaigns to take to possibly get someone off the ballot in this case, or to at least show that the campaign looks weak and unorganized. I think we've been seeing that for many cycles. But across Iowa, there have been a few instances this cycle of libertarians getting kicked off the ballot entirely, for different reasons. And there's also the stories that have emerged about this being sort of a coordinated campaign among the Republican Party, to have influential figures, like the Secretary of Health, reach out to these candidates to encourage them to drop out. I think right, there's evidence that Republicans are nervous about libertarian candidates being spoiler candidates. Yeah. That is, candidates who take away just enough of the vote that a Republican, can't edge out a Democrat in a close election. And so, there's never enough in when you look at one case alone that this is, any sort of like conspiracy. But I think it is in this environment. You have to, it is, the onus is on the candidate to know, and the campaign to know every single rule and even if you have someone telling you that that's not the rule, if you've read it yourself, that, you have to be fully within the confines of the law because this is sort of the environment that we're in right now.
Wayne, Rob Sand recused himself from this panel because he's on the ballot in this race. Makes sense. He was replaced by Mike Nagg. This left 3 Republicans deciding whether a third-party ticket could compete against a Republican nominee. Even if everyone acted in good faith, does that look okay to you?
I think it's problematic that it's left up to the Republicans, who obviously have a party position on this, to make the final decision. So I'm sorry that we're ending up in that position.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the former President Obama's endorsement of Josh Turek. Got an assist this morning. The former president endorsed Iowa's Democratic Senate nominee in a video of the two of them shooting baskets in a nonpartisan way. It's entertaining. Whatever your politics, have a look at it on YouTube. Instead of playing horse, they play a game of Iowa. Let's listen.
Who's got next?
I got it. You ready for me, Josh?
I'm ready.
Let's go. We playing horse or what?
We're playing Iowa.
I know a little something about winning Iowa.
All right, here we go.
We ready?
You know when it's in.
Come on, I'm not going to just give it away.
All right.
That thing is silky smooth.
Thousands of hours of practice.
You were the shooter?
4-time Paralympian, 2-time gold medalist.
Back-to-back gold medals.
Okay.
I told you, I'm not just going to give it away to you. You got to earn this thing.
We'll back up a little bit. All right.
See, this is just going to put some pressure on me. Let's see if the bank's open. Oh, bank was closed.
Quite entertaining. First half sort of more fun. Second half they get down to some slogans, some campaigning there. Besides naming their Mount Rushmore of basketball players in this 2.5-minute video, Obama and Turek talk about their relationships with Iowa, which, of course, Obama won both in 2008 and 2012. Let's hear a little bit more of that video.
Of all the things I've done in politics, Iowa was my favorite thing. There was just a magic about regular folks showing up in gyms
like this,
and just talking out. How do we move our state forward? How do we move the country forward?
Well, I'll tell you what, people all across Iowa are saying that they're feeling that hope, that optimism for the first time in a long time.
That's my sense. That's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah.
I've seen enough. Not only did I get whooped, but you've got here a man of character, somebody who knows how to win. Now the ball's in your court, Iowa.
Okay, Megan, I don't know if you saw the video that came out this morning. This is a shot at Iowans' sense of themselves as much as it is an endorsement. The game, not horse, but Iowa. The closing line is, as you heard it, the ball's in your court, Iowa. Megan, you study how national figures speak into local races. Does this kind of flattery plus nudge actually work, or do voters see the machinery here going on?
So I think that, this does call back for a lot of, especially, I don't want to say older voters, but, voters who were around in that cycle, which is now, we're talking about 18 years ago. We're talking about a cycle and a time that for a lot of folks who have been Democrats for a long time, that holds some nostalgia for them, and still a lot of inspiration. I think the Obamas, especially with the opening of their presidential center in Chicago right now, have been in the news a lot. We've seen them taking a little bit more of an active role and stepping back into politics, and they've generally been received pretty well. And so I think for that demographic of Democratic voters, that this is, a signal too that this sort of Iowa that they perhaps used to know, and this political landscape that, how Iowa used to be much swingier and much more of a purple state, that signals, perhaps gives some hope for those voters that that's in reach again. I think for younger voters, this is a trickier situation because, they don't have that nostalgia for Obama. They are, especially if we're talking about the youngest voters, the voters that Wayne and I maybe interact with more often that are college students. they have just lived in the Trump era. And so, they don't have the same reaction. And so I think that there's still work there. To think about what's the vision for the campaign for the future of Iowa, not looking back on where Iowa has been, but where's the campaign see Iowa going?
Yeah, and Megan, I don't know if you've run into this among our youngest voters, but I sure have. On the progressive side of the Democratic Party, our most progressive young voters, they don't look at Obama the same way the previous generations did. They kind of find a lot of fault there, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this was true even, in the 2012 election, that there were I just remember a parody music video of a Got Ya song, somebody that I used to know, that criticized Obama. And sort of the things he had done during comparing promises and actual things he had done during his first term. And so I think that, when we're talking about millennials and younger, there are some folks who look at the Obama administration with more nuance, possibly even skepticism. It's hard because I think that Turek is not, it's hard in Iowa, potentially to bring out someone like AOC and not really just have a lot of negative headlines about that and invite attacks. And so it's sort of a tricky needle to thread there. Right.
We have to go to break in about a minute. But Megan, last point for you on this. Hinson has Trump's endorsement that came a while ago. Now Turek has Obama's in a state that Trump won by 13. Which endorsement do you think is the bigger risk to the candidate who received it? Which benefits the most, Hinson or Turek, based on the big endorsements they've received?
So I actually think Turek's Obama endorsement is a bigger get. If you look at how people are feeling right now, even if younger voters are skeptical of Obama, overall approval ratings for Obama are much, much higher than approval ratings for Trump. And Trump's disapproval ratings are, and the gap between those is pretty abysmal. And so I think that, you do risk, aligning yourself too closely with Trump in a midterm where that might sink your ship.
Right. And one could say Barack Obama doesn't spend his capital on races he thinks are gone. It's another aspect of that. We're almost gone for this first part of our segment. Of course, we'll be back. And when we come back, Wayne, I would like your thoughts on the Iran war. Now that pause is over. It didn't hold, and we'll talk about it when we return. Join our conversation, 1-866-780-9100, river to river at iowapublicradio.org. Ben Kiefer with Megan Goldberg and Wayne Moyer. So glad you're on board this edition of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer with Wayne Moyer of Grinnell College, Megan Goldberg of Cornell College. And you, if you'd like to chip in a question, 1-866-780-9100, river to river at iowapublicradio.org. Before we get Wayne's read on the Middle East war currently, let's finish up with that open Senate race that we were picking apart in the first segment. Megan, back to you here. I want to have us listen to a campaign ad from the Hinson campaign and the National Republican Senatorial Committee released this ad last week featuring Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and attacking Josh Turek on what they say as the new darling of the radical left. Let's listen.
Why have Chuck Schumer and the radical left spent millions helping Josh Turek? Because they know Turek supports their liberal agenda. Taxpayer-funded sex change surgeries, welfare benefits for illegals. Turek supports it. He wants it easier for illegal immigrants to vote, and even opposed Iowa schools teaching about the greatness of America. No wonder Turek is the new darling of the radical left. Liberal Josh Turek. He'll be their senator, not yours.
Okay, Megan, that's a prominent narrative we see here. Explain what's behind that narrative, tying it to the most progressive wing of the Democratic Party, right? And Josh Turek.
So I think that going back to our earlier conversation about, Obama not necessarily being aligned with progressive young voters. We talk a lot about divisions within the Democratic Party, but that's such a perspective from inside the Democratic Party too. I think that, for folks looking, if you're a Republican or you're not inside the Democratic Party, you don't really like look and see those different lanes. And so it doesn't, I think that if you talk to young voters who are especially engaged in politics, they're going to draw and debate over lines between, what does it mean to be left and what does it mean to be liberal? And it doesn't matter when your Republican opponent is writing attack ads. It doesn't matter sort of what wing of the party you align yourself with. You're going to get hit with that same narrative because, of course, a Republican's never going to run a commercial that says, that Josh Turek, he's pretty moderate and pretty centrist and maybe okay. It's not going to happen. And so in some ways, I said he can't bring AOC in, but it's like, it doesn't matter if he brings in the most moderate Democratic endorsements. That does not matter to the Republican voter because Democrats sort of are all going to get squished into that same category as being quite radical.
Let's go to politics abroad with you, Wayne, and your read on this. How many? 5 months we've been dealing with this new Middle East war. The pause didn't hold. Iran's Revolutionary Guard fired missiles at American forces in Jordan overnight. Its first attack since a 5-day lull that began last Friday. The U.S. military says it intercepted the barrage. Hours later, U.S. and Saudi Arabian forces strike back, hitting Iran-backed militias inside Iraq. The militias had launched 3 days of attack on Saudi energy sites from Iraqi territory. At least 20 fighters were killed. This comes a day after President Trump met Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, at the White House, their first meeting since the war began 5 months ago. And a day after Trump told Axios the two sides were in, quote, very deep talks. Iran's deputy foreign minister said publicly, no talks at all happening. Whatever was happening diplomatic, it didn't stop the shooting. Wayne, what's your read? After 5 days of quiet, then we have more missiles now, a flare-up. What's going on, do you think?
I think Trump is in a very, very awkward position right now. On one hand, the Iranian attacks provide an incentive to go back to full-fledged fighting. But if Trump goes back to full-fledged attacks on Iran, that's with the election so close, that clearly is going to hurt the Republican Party very seriously in the November election. If on the other hand, Trump doesn't respond, then that also creates problems. It makes him look weak. And makes the Iranians look stronger. Now, Trump wants to negotiate, but I think the Iranians are just holding out in hopes that Trump is going to give up before they have to give up.
Yeah, and they've got this. They've got this card, right? The launching of the war by the U.S. and Israel opened the door, which to Iran to try to control, which they have to a great degree, the Strait of Hormuz. They walked right through that door, and that's their trump card, pardon the pun, right?
The Iranians can hold on to the strait at least until after the election, unless the U.S. really takes massive, and Israel together take massive military action. Yeah. And and there's no assurance that would succeed. So I think the situation is extremely difficult for the United States at this moment. I think the best that we can do is sort of hold on to what we have now in terms of essentially a blockade. And even though that will be very difficult, at least will save American lives if we go back into full-fledged, which would be lost if we go back to full-fledged escalation.
Yeah. Wayne, reporting says this war has already strained American Patriot missile stockpiles badly enough that Ukraine is now being approved to build its own interceptors. At the same time, Iran claims its weapons production lines are more active than ever. Our Secretary of War, Hegseth, wouldn't reaffirm his earlier claim that Iran's military was destroyed the other day. What does it mean for U.S. strategy globally, the superpower in the world, when a regional war is eating into the U.S. air defense capacity needed elsewhere?
Well, it's certainly doing that, and it's also getting at U.S. credibility in the world. The fact that the United States got into this war in the first place and now is not able to handle it, and the president's positions vary from day to day, I think is hurt the United States around the world, or hurt our ability to influence other nations to get them to do the things we want them to do.
Yeah, unless you think this is purely partisan. We have Steve Bannon. Let me go to you on this, Megan. Steve Bannon says, the president's most ardent America First supporters are furious about this continued involvement with Israel. 5 months in, the fighting resuming after a failed pause. Is this political coalition that backed this war coming apart? Megan, what do you see as, we talked about splits in the Democratic Party. What about over the war in the Republican Party? Huge splits, right?
Right. I mean, there are definitely sort of in the Republican orbit, there are some leadership figures, public figures talking critically about Trump. And there are, and you can always sort of find interviews of Trump voters who feel betrayed. And it's in particular, there were voters who really latched on to the statement by Trump that a vote for Trump is a vote for peace and a vote for Harris was a vote for war. And that doesn't seem to be the case. And there was a lot of criticism from the Democratic side at the time that they were sort of like, of course, that's not the case. But, I think there's some fracturing. And it's really, I think there is, as Wayne said, the administration is in a difficult spot going into these midterms where there are all sorts of other things unrelated to this, pushing Trump's disapproval up and approval down. And, this certainly doesn't help. I think that's why the administration is trying so hard to sort of shape the perceptions of this conflict among their base, to really paint the picture that things are going well and that, the U.S. is emerging sort of victorious here, when a lot of the boots on the ground reporting suggests that is far, far from the case, and that we see the impact in other ways, too, especially when it concerns sort of the supply chain going through the strait. Mm-hmm.
Politics Wednesday on River to River from IPR News. Megan Goldberg of Cornell College, Wayne Moyer of Grinnell College. Join us, 1-866-780-9100. River to River at iowapublicradio.org. Let's dive back to domestic, E-15 tariffs and the farm economy. And to you, Wayne, the Iowa Ag Secretary, Mike Naig, went public Friday with a message for the U.S. Senate on ethanol. Pass year-round E-15. He says he doesn't much care what bill it rides on. Some frustration I would sense there. The E-15 was dropped from a stopgap spending bill in January at the last minute, pulled from the Farm Bill this spring. The House has passed a standalone version in May. The Senate Ag Chairman's Farm Bill leaves it out. Monty Shaw of the Iowa Renewables Fuels Association has compared it to, Lucy pulling away Charlie Brown's football now for 10 years. So, and then we have the new tariffs here, don't we, Wayne, with America's largest trading partners taking effect on Friday. You've studied international food, agricultural policy for decades. What do you make of this situation?
Well, I think this is a really tough one. There's a large part of the fossil fuel industry that doesn't want E-15, and they're very strong in the Trump administration, and that will make it very, very difficult, I think, to get it through. On the other hand, Iowa farmers haven't done very well at all in terms of the Trump administration policies, tariffs, especially soybean. China's stopping its buying of soybeans for a long period of time. So I think the Democrats are gaining from all of this in Iowa, at least. But I don't think we're going to get the Senate to approve E15.
Mm-hmm. The spending bill that could finally carry E15 is the same bill House Republicans attached, I understand, to a voter ID requirement to Iowa corn a priority, now tied to this national fight about voting. Megan, that doesn't sound like it has great prospects. And how do you explain that to farmers back home when you have a Republican congressional delegation?
Right. I mean, so it's sort of long been the practice of Congress to attach, certain issues to bills to make them either harder or easier to pass. But yeah, I think this one is tricky because these two things are not particularly related to each other. And we have these big omnibus bills now. And this isn't even particularly that omnibus style, but, it's really hard when you pair these things together because one of the issues can sort of sink the other one. And it's not often that you get one to sort of raise the other one up. And it's hard to, for members of Congress to explain to their constituents why you can't get this moving. And I think it's too, I want to say in the broader view here is that, there's been a lot of discourse, I think, this election cycle about the ways in which constituents in one state or voters in one state sort of, talk about candidates in other states, especially when it comes, this has happened a lot in sort of the Maine race and Maine voters telling other people to stay out of it.
Yep.
But I think this is a great example of how, the decisions that the House and the Senate make affect us all, and that we can't always pursue our own state's interest when legislation is made, from a national assembly. And this is sort of the effect you get. And we don't actually really want a system where every state gets, what's best for them, because then you can get weird conflicting legislation. You can get much higher spending than you would otherwise. And so I think this is one of those, the hard truth about big problems in a geographically diverse and a geographically large country. It can be hard to make policy.
Yeah. The president wants the Senate, Megan, to cancel its 5-week August recess, and if that doesn't work, to abolish the Senate filibuster. Trump posted Monday that John Thune, the majority leader, should not let the Senate leave town until it passes the Save America Act. That's the election bill that would require proof of citizenship to register, a photo ID to vote, would restrict mail-in ballots. Better still, he wrote, terminate the filibuster and Republicans can pass everything they've ever dreamed of. He says Thune is not biting. He's co-sponsor of the bill. He says the Senate has voted on it 4 or 5 times already. Votes are just not there, he says. They could stay there till Christmas, he says, and Democrats won't vote for it. Republicans still won't kill the legislative filibuster. So, Megan, on this, how unusual is it for a leader to say out loud, Thune, to say this about his own president's demand?
So I think it's a sign that Trump's sort of capture of the party is a little weaker than it used to be. But then again, I mean, abolishing the filibuster has been on sort of, not the docket, I don't want to say, but in the public mind and in public conversation for, decades at this point. And if you look at this election cycle, it's not even a tiny bit surprising that Republicans aren't willing to abolish it because, yes, it would let them get a lot done in the next, 5 months. But they don't like their chances necessarily of holding on to that majority. And, I think that if you look at a lot of the ratings right now, the chance of Democrats having the majority in the next cycle are not that high, but Republicans aren't willing to take that gamble. That's the problem with the filibuster is it relies to get rid of it. The party in control now has to look forward and say, in the next session, I think I will still be in charge. Because the filibuster then gives you power if you're the minority party. And so that's why it has such long lasting power, despite, the many pretty valid from a democratic, democracy point of view, the many criticisms of the filibuster.
Yeah. We have about a minute before break. Your view on this, Wayne, because the president's fallback is to end the filibuster in the Senate entirely. That would be a momentous shift. In fact, the Wall Street Journal editorial page not exactly a hostile outlet for the president, called that a terrible trade. What are you thinking, Wayne?
I'm thinking of the November election. And I think what Trump is maybe trying to do is the sense that if nothing happens in terms of the Save America Act, the Democrats will really win. But what Trump will say is the election has been stolen because the Save America Act wasn't passed. And I think he's appealing to his base. The Save America Act is terribly important, and we have to pass it. But if he can't pass it, then he's got a basis for making an election claim afterwards that the election was stolen again.
Wayne Moyer of Grinnell College, Megan Goldberg of Cornell College. And we'll be back with the final segment of this edition of River to River Politics Wednesday on this 29th day of July, 2026. When we come back, let's talk about Iowa Democrats and spring forward to the 2028 calendar. And for the second cycle in a row, Iowa is not on the Democrats' early presidential calendar. We'll see if, we'll ask if it makes sense for Iowa to buck the National Party in just a moment. Back with more of this Politics Wednesday edition of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer with Megan Goldberg and Wayne Moyer, our two political analysts this week. Here's a question before we move to the Iowa Democrats and the 2028 calendar. Megan, from a listener here, the House Democrats have elevated James' race in Iowa's 2nd District to one they want to flip. The asker wonders, why now? Is it because the race is getting more competitive? Or maybe other House races are tightening over the given gerrymandered maps? And then adding here, James and her opponent Mitchell have similar amounts of money, but James' fundraising has recently picked up. I'm not completely tuned into this race, the Iowa's 2nd District, at the very moment right now. I don't know if you are, Megan.
You know, I do think that yes to all of those reasons. I think there have been shifting national conditions, in terms of, how are the Democrat chances looking overall. But I also think, that James has gone from being relatively unknown to a lot of national groups to sort of proving herself as a high quality candidate. And so I think that's why, the folks are paying more attention. Her fundraising has picked up. That's a signal to them as well. And I think that Mitchell is not the strongest candidate that Republicans could have run either. And that, folks nationally and bigger donors are catching on to that. I think Mitchell has support from parts of the Republican Party in Iowa, but, there's big questions about how recently he moved to the district. Of course, he represented at the state level a district that is not inside Iowa's 2nd congressional district. And so I think that, it's sort of a mix of all of these. It's sort of a lot of pieces coming together and looking like, and I think too, a rising tide lifts all boats when you have some competitive elections in the state where, the Democratic candidates are getting a lot of national attention. It naturally makes people ask, like, what else is there in Iowa? And let's look more carefully at that. In the 4th District, I don't want to rule them out because I know that, the Democratic parties there at the county level have put in a lot of work. But I think the same is true in the 2nd District as well, to sort of get back to a place where these districts can be closer and more competitive.
Right. And to fill us in, what I should have done at the beginning is to talk about the 2nd District. Lindsey James there, the Democrat state representative, won the Democratic primary. Joe Mitchell, Republican, former Iowa state representative, who won the Republican primary. But also we have Dave Bushaw, independent, in that race. Also Rick Stewart, the Libertarian nominee. Well, let's go to this now. For the 2nd cycle in a row, Iowa not on the Democrats' early presidential calendar, I should say. The DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee voted last Friday. South Carolina will lead off January 22nd, 2028. What follows? Michigan after that, Nevada, New Hampshire, Virginia, New Mexico. Iowa's Democratic State Party Chair Rita Hart said Iowa Democrats will have more say after November and pointedly did not rule out going first anyway. Interestingly, the Iowa Republican chair, Jeff Kaufman, has publicly egged them on, saying, do it, defy the DNC. Megan, what do you think here? What should the Iowa Democrats do? Pay attention, follow Jeff Kaufman, his recommendation?
It's odd when you have them both, I guess, fighting kind of for the same thing. I think that Rita Hart's comment about what happens in Iowa in November is not untrue. I mean, I don't think you're going to see a big calendar shift, but you might see the DNC being more willing to look the other way, perhaps, because part of the reason it's Iowa's demographics is also Iowa's politics that have shifted. And it's a hard sell nationally to Democrats to say, hey, we should let a state that has consistently voted for Republican candidates at the state level, at the local level, at the national level. Let's let them choose the Democratic nominee. Right? That's sort of like, I can see that as someone who's not originally from Iowa, is from the Midwest. I see the logic there. And that being said, it's obvious, there's obvious reasons for the Democratic Party in Iowa to hold on to that sort of influence and really the ties it gives them to national figures. I think as an Iowa voter, selfishly, it's fun to, be the center of attention for a little while. But as someone who also caucused, it's a lot of time and it's hard, especially for lots of different groups for different reasons. I think that it is a little bit of a game of chicken. The rules are what the rules are. But it is, if Rita Hart and the Iowa Democratic Party decide to hold something anyways, and to sort of, try to put Iowa at the center of this nomination process at the beginning of it again. The question mark is, we have the rules, but what's the actual response from the National Democratic Party? Are they going to, what are the sanctions on candidates and on Iowa?
Yeah.
What I would sort of add to what Megan's saying, I think the Democratic Party should lay low until after the November elections. And if the Democrats gain in both the House of Representatives and gain in the Senate, the state's position in terms of the 2028 primary season will be definitely stronger.
I see what you mean, Wayne. Let's go to our caller, Patricia in Cedar Rapids, 1-866-780-9100. Patricia, thanks for joining us on Politics Wednesday of River to River.
Hi, this is Patricia. Thanks for taking my call. I've worked at two caucuses.
Can you turn down the radio in the background, Patricia? That would help us a bit.
There isn't a radio. Well, I've had Alexa was on there.
Yeah, okay. Tell Alexa to be quiet for a moment, please. Okay, Patricia, you there? Go ahead.
I am, yes. Hang on, let me see if there's two Alexas.
Oh, man. Okay.
No, she's not on either. No, they're off. Okay. I've worked at two caucuses, and in Iowa, in the winter, when the caucuses go, the weather's terrible. We have heavy snowfalls. It's hard for people to get to the polling place. And when they do, there's huge snow piles, and it limits the parking spaces.
Yeah.
And sometimes people get locked out from voting because they can't get parked and they miss the deadline. So I don't think it's too bad if Iowa goes a bit later for their caucus.
Okay. Patricia, thank you very much for that comment on the Iowa caucuses. And now you can be alone with Alexa there for a while, I guess. All right, let's end up with this. 97 days from the November 3rd election, Iowa has become something it hasn't been in a long time, genuinely competitive. Wayne and Megan, I want to sort of zoom out to a big picture and have you look up and down the ballot since we have passed the 100-day mark before the midterms. Decision desks, HQ's forecast gave Democrats about a 3 in 5 chance of taking the House, and Republicans about the same odds of holding the Senate, a projected 50-50 chamber with Vice President Vance breaking ties. But buried in that state-level analysis is a number that should get Iowa's attention. In that analysis, and you've got other analysis to look at as well, I'm sure, if Democrats win both Iowa and Ohio, we're talking about the Senate, their chances of a Senate majority rise to roughly 9 in 10. I don't know how they arrive at that, but they did. Iowa isn't a sideshow in this cycle. It may be the whole thing. What do you think of that analysis, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it is that's, circling back to the beginning of the show when we talked about Obama's endorsement. That's why, that we're getting sort of these national figures engaged. I think that, my assessment of these races has definitely shifted over the last year towards thinking they are much, much more competitive. That being said, competitive elections are going to be an uphill battle for all of the candidates. And, there might be fewer than 100 days left, but every single one of those days, the campaigns really have to be on the ground. That things like, an Obama commercial and an Obama endorsement can bring in a lot of fundraising, especially from outside of the state, people seeing that, Obama's posting this guy from Iowa on Instagram. But at the same time, the campaigns also have to keep an eye on their own voters, that, they need to be out there knocking doors and talking to people, and sort of making those connections that I think, because of the way Iowa has had this role in national elections, a lot of voters have this perception of retail politics being really, really significant and wanting to make connections to the campaigns, especially those engaged voters, that they want to hear from the campaigns themselves. And so that's the other thing, is national attention is really sort of like flashy and fun, and it brings in money. But candidates really can't neglect that personal connection and being in the state and talking to their, potential constituents.
Yeah. Let
me just add one little
Wayne, go ahead.
Here. I read a lot of international media, and we're getting the same kind of attention right now we would have gotten during the years that the Iowa caucus was first. People around the world, knowing how important Iowa is in this coming election, are paying attention to us that they otherwise would not have even thought about the state. So I think this is a great year for getting international attention in terms of what's going on in Iowa.
Yeah. And Wayne, in your wheelhouse in foreign policy, 78% of Americans say this administration isn't focused enough on lowering prices. That's nearly 8 in 10. A level of agreement you almost never see. We have oil spiking again today on the renewed fighting. I wonder, from your perspective, how tightly are the war, the economy, especially here in the Midwest, now bound together as one political problem in many voters' minds?
I think that's certainly true. Voters are concerned about local issues, but what's happening in terms of inflation, what's happening in terms of job, what's happening in terms of tariffs and all that, all go through to the level of the consumer at some stage. And the uncertainty of knowing exactly where policies are going and exactly what the president's goals are at any given moment, I think adds to the problem.
And of course, this open Senate race, a lot of the reason that so many, and Wayne says internationally, are paying attention to Iowa, not because of the caucuses, but because of all our competitive races. Megan, on the open Senate race, Real Clear Politics has our Senate race as an exact tie. I think polls, Max has Hinson up nearly 3. The same race, the same polls, different polls, opposite conclusions. What do you take away? What should listeners actually take away from the polls we're seeing at this point?
Yeah, I mean, so I think for the polls, it really just echoes what we've been talking about. This is an extremely competitive race. I think that, if you're looking ahead to November, I'm always sort of think about how important it is to vote, that it could be a fairly slim number of votes that separate the winner from the loser. Mm-hmm. And, that's one thing when you're talking about one Senate seat, but when you're talking about that Senate seat having the potential to shift power to a different party at the Senate level, that's all the more reason, sort of motivate you to get out and vote and have a big, if you ever felt like your vote doesn't matter that much, in Iowa, all of a sudden, it really does. The more attention a race is getting, you can almost use that as a litmus test for how much does my vote matter this cycle. And because you get a lot of attention when the race is close. And so that's the takeaway is, to take your job as a voter seriously, to get out there and vote and think about the two candidates and what it means for not just the state and not just you, but, again, this has a national impact as well.
And be enthusiastic about your civic duty as an Iowan, as an American. Megan, among Iowans who call themselves extremely motivated to vote, let's talk about the enthusiasm gap, I guess. Turek leads by 15. 67% of Democrats there extremely motivated. 53% of Republicans in a midterm. How much is that point worth? Maybe you've seen other polls with different enthusiasm gaps or lack of gaps.
Yeah, so I think one thing that's happening here is that in today's political context, people are really motivated by negative partisanship, which is that you're really motivated by not letting the other party be in power. And so I think if you're looking at the context right now, Democratic voters are more excited to get out and vote because it's representing some sort of change. It's an open seat, so obviously it's a change on the Republican side as well, but it's not really, it's a changing of the guard that's going to do the same thing, versus Turek is a big change. And so I think you're seeing a lot of those enthusiastic voters are more likely to be Democrats because they are ready to make this shift. And I also think, Trump's overall, that gap between his net approval is so bad right now that Republican voters are not as enthusiastic about voting because their side is just like not doing that well overall, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you're seeing some of that gap.
Wayne, in terms of foreign policy, of course, the president driving the bus here, and many would say in a much different direction than previous, even Republican administrations here. How much could an improvement on foreign policy, I don't know, you could imagine what that might be. Would that sway voters? Is it really a minor thing, do you think, in voters' minds? Or if the president comes out looking better than he does today by the time November rolls around in terms of foreign policy, is that a big get? Is that something that can shift enough votes there to make him, not lose both chambers?
I think if somehow, and I don't think it's even likely to happen, he was to end the war in Iran with Iran in a positive way, that might make some difference. But I think he's been so discredited in so many different areas that even that might not be enough.
Okay. What do you think, Megan? A final word from you before we go. We have about a minute.
Yeah. So I think it's so hard, as Wayne said, this sort of like bundle of issues really comes down to the consumer at the end of the day. And that's where I think, you see the effect of foreign policy. There might be a few folks who, if there were massive changes, you might see some shift. But I think, on the other hand, if it's going to make a difference, it's going to make a difference in really close elections. And that's what we're looking at in Iowa. So I think that we'll also be hearing potentially about potentially a wider range of issues in Iowa because, the candidates are trying to find those different issues that will speak to tiny groups of voters because those tiny groups are becoming more and more pivotal. A lot of the campaign work right now is trying to identify, how are we mobilizing and possibly persuading some of these groups of voters.
97 days before midterms. Plenty of analysis to come here on Politics Wednesday. Sure glad to have the expertise of Megan Goldberg of Cornell College and Wayne Moyer of Grinnell College. Thank you both.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Today's program produced by Samantha McIntosh, technical support from Nev Kelly and Jackson Trotman. I'm Ben Kiefer. Thanks for joining us.